Syria will open 2 new crossing points from Turkey to the country's rebel-held northwest to deliver desperately needed aid to earthquake victims. Another shooting in the US. At least 3 people have been killed after a gunman opened fire at Michigan State University.
New Zealand declares a national state of emergency for only the 3rd time in its history as Cyclone Gabrielle causes widespread flooding.
Poland trains Ukrainian troops on Leopard 2 tanks as Kyiv braces for a new Russian offensive.
The White House claims China has a balloon program connected to its army and that recent UFOs in US airspace are not alien.
Syria's president has agreed to open 2 new crossing points from Turkey to the country's rebel-held northwest to deliver desperately needed aid to help millions of earthquake victims. The UN has only been allowed in the Idlib area through a single crossing. It's severely hampered help getting through. On Monday night, the death toll from the February 6 earthquake surpassed 37,000. Now delivering food, health, shelter and other life-saving supplies to those more fortunate takes top priority. 1 week on from the quakes in Syria and Turkey, hopes of finding anyone who has survived trapped under the rubble is dwindling fast. Hussein Berber, who was rescued in the 183rd hour of the earthquake, may be one of the last exceptions. The rescue phase appears to be drawing to a close. It's for the living that concern is growing. Children's lives have been uprooted and they're surrounded by death and destruction. Thousands of them have lost their parents and conditions are harsh outside. It's the wintertime and temperatures are freezing. There's an obvious risk of major health issues to come for adults and children alike. A sleepless night in Michigan as another shooting rocks another US city. At least 3 people have been killed after a gunman opened fire at Michigan State University. Students and local residents at East Lansing were told to shelter during a manhunt for the attacker. 5 people were injured.
I can confirm that there were at least 5 victims. All 5 victims were transported to the hospital. Some of those victims do have life-threatening injuries.
Police say the suspect's body was later found. He had died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 43 years old with no known affiliation to the university.
The New Zealand government has declared a national state of emergency after the North Island was hit by Cyclone Gabrielle. Thousands of homes have been affected by flooding and more than 225,000 people have been left without power. A severe situation, says Prime Minister Chris Hipkins.
Cyclone Gabrielle is the most significant weather event New Zealand has seen this century. The severity and the breadth of the damage that we are seeing has not been experienced in a generation. This morning we declared a national emergency for only the 3rd time in our history.
The Northern Ireland is the most populated area of the country and has not yet recovered from the heavy floods it suffered last January, which left several people dead.
NATO and its allies must ramp up production of ammunition if it's to continue providing Ukraine with the capacity to fight Russia. The Alliance Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that Kiev is using much more supplies than the production capacity of NATO members. It represents a challenge to both NATO and Ukraine. Stoltenberg is now urging allies to invest in production as well as expanding it.
For example, the waiting time for large caliber ammunition has increased from 12 to 28 months. Orders placed today would only be delivered 2.5 years later. So we need to ramp up production and invest in our production capacity.
NATO defence ministers will discuss the matter on Tuesday and Wednesday in Brussels. But with the Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine having already started, things are becoming more and more urgent.
I think the reality is that we have seen the start already. Because we see now what Russia does now, President Putin do now, is to send in thousands of more troops, accepting a very high rate of casualty, taking big losses, but putting pressure on the Ukrainians. And what Russia lacks in quality, they try to compensate in quantity, meaning that the leadership, the logistics, the equipment, the training don't have the same level as the Ukrainian forces, but they have more forces.
NATO defence ministers will also discuss the need to provide Ukraine with more weapons, with one of the more sensitive issues being if they will send fighter jets, as Kiev is now demanding.
With Ukraine bracing itself for a much-expected new offensive from Russia, some of Kyiv's troops are participating in training sessions on Leopard 2 tanks in Poland. It's part of the European Union's military assistance to Ukraine. Polish President Andrzej Duda was there to see for himself. Warsaw is among the most active supporters of neighbouring Ukraine and has pushed European nations to provide the tanks. Russia is likely to try to secure territory it illegally annexed in late September and where it claims its rule is welcomed. Before and after images show the destruction of the Donetsk region, where the Kremlin's troops are currently engaged in frontline battles. Russia is also claiming to have taken the village of Krasnohora near Bakhmut. It mentions volunteer assault units being used, a rare admission from Russia's army that fighters from the notorious Wagner paramilitary group were involved. In the city of Kherson, which was once under Russian control, there's much needed help from volunteer doctors. With Russian shelling continuing, the residents risk coming out of shelters to seek treatment for chronic conditions neglected under the occupation.
Ukrainian military officials and Russian pro-war nationalist voices are downplaying Russia's ability to launch a sweeping, large-scale offensive in Donetsk region in the current circumstances of the Russian armed forces. Now, this is the latest conclusion by the Institute for the Study of War. The think tank has previously assessed that Russian forces have regained the initiative on the Svatovo-Kreminna line, but that the offensive has not yet reached its full tempo. Russian forces reported culmination and tactical failures around Vuhledar in the region of Donetsk have likely further weakened the Russian ultranationalist community's belief that Russian forces are able to launch a decisive offensive operation. The Russian military command is deploying its most elite units to the Bakhmut area amid the reported Russian heavy personnel losses here in smaller formations using urban infiltration tactics, according to the limited footage of Russian tactics in the area that the Institute for the Study of War has observed. Now, Russian offensive operations elsewhere in Donetsk region and along the Svatovo-Kreminna line have resulted in marginal advances without operational significance thus far. Despite the current operational focus on central Donbas, Russia remains concerned about guarding the extremities of its extended front line, says the UK Defence Ministry. This is demonstrated by continued construction of defensive fortifications in Zaporizhia region and Luhansk regions and deployment of personnel. A major Ukrainian breakthrough in Zaporizhia would seriously challenge the viability of Russia's land bridge linking Russia's Rostov region and Crimea. Ukrainian success in Luhansk would further undermine Russia's professed war aim of what Moscow calls liberating the Donbas. Deciding which of these threats to prioritize countering is likely one of the central dilemmas for Russian operational planners.
The mystery of 4 unidentified flying objects in North American airspace is straining already frosty relations between Washington and Beijing. The U.S. claimed the first UFO was a Chinese spy balloon, part of a larger high-altitude intelligence-gathering program. The other 3 are so far unexplained, but the White House has been clear what they are not.
I know there have been questions and concerns about this, but there is no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity.
Even so, the White House defended the decision to shoot down the objects. First, it was because they are a danger to commercial air traffic. Now the US says China has a balloon program connected to its army.
Even though we had no indications that any of these three objects were surveilling, we couldn't rule that out. And so you want to err on the side of safety here in terms of protecting our national security.
Beijing initially dismissed the US as overreacting, but has now claimed that Washington has previously sent balloons into Chinese airspace.
美方气球非法进入别国领空，也司空见惯。仅去年以来，美方高空气球未经中国相关部门批准，10余次非法飞越中国领空。美方首先要做的，应当是反躬自省，改弦更张，而不是污蔑抹黑、煽动对抗。
Claims and counterclaims of espionage between the two superpowers is just the latest diplomatic row in an already tense relationship.
Czech Republic midfielder Jakub Jankto has become the first active player in men's international football to announce he is gay. The 27-year-old plays for Spanish side Getafe but is on loan to Sparta Prague. Posting to Twitter, he says he no longer wishes to hide, but wants to live his life in freedom, without fear and without prejudice. Last year, Australian Josh Cavallo was the only openly gay top-flight male professional footballer in the world.